mezuzah there on the doorpost. So she's hoping that there's this somewhere in there that they were able to put a hiding place. And she gets this great idea as she walks through and looks at the house. And she's nervous about telling her friends that she may have a way to save them. But she does. And they have this great, you'll have to read the book for all the details, but over the next couple of days, she asks the major for a pass so she can go to the villa to get things ready. She helps them escape out of the laundry room, down the streets of the town, to the villa, down a coal chute that led into the basement, until all 12 of them were down there in the basement of this German major's home. She breathes a sigh of relief just getting them there until the major comes by and he looks at the house. He walks through it and he says, Irene, this house is filthy. I want it scrubbed and I want it painted from top to bottom. And he made her arrive every day with a squad of German soldiers ready to do that. So she keeps her friends super quiet in the basement, starts the soldiers upstairs. And when they were finished, she brought the soldiers from the front staircase down, brought her friends from the basement, the back staircase up, hid them in a tiny spot up in the attic for days, literally days, while the rest of the house was cleaned and painted. And finally the soldiers were done and left, and she was able to get them down out of the basement. Can you imagine how stiff you'd be in a fetal position for days? Anyway, they were able to get back down to the basement. And again, she just breathed a sigh of relief until the major came by after all the cleaning and painting was done, and he says, Irene, the house looks great. We're going to start entertaining. There'll be large parties, a lot of work, but not to worry, because I'm going to bring a young soldier who can live here with you and help you. He can sleep in the basement. That would not work. And so she went to the major and she pleaded with him, please don't bring a young man to be with me all day long. I would be a nervous wreck having him here. She had to tell him about the Russians, about the rapes, and why she would be so nervous. He said, don't be an idiot. Nothing's going to happen to you in my house. You're perfectly safe here. But she pleaded, she begged, she said, honestly, I don't need any help. I can do everything myself. You'll see. He said, Irene, we're going to have parties for 30, 40, 50 people a night. Besides shopping and cooking and cleaning, there's heavy lifting, there's laundry, there's ironing, there's gardening. There is no way one person can do it all. She continued to plead and beg until finally he said, enough. I'll give you one chance. The first time you embarrass me, the first time you can't keep up, my soldier comes in. So they had a great arrangement, because every morning the major would get up, have breakfast, and he would leave the villa to go to his office or wherever he went, and Mom would follow him with her house key, and she'd put her key on the inside of the doorknob. That way, if he came home before he was supposed to, his key wouldn't unlock the door and he'd have to ring the doorbell, which would give her time to clean things up. She had one of the men down in the basement rig up an alarm bell, a button underneath the rug by the front door that she could step on once, just tell them to be quiet, twice to tell them to hide. And after every day when he would leave and go to his office, they had the villa to themselves. They searched from top to bottom, hoping to find that hiding place. And sure enough, they did. It was down in the basement. You literally had to lay on your stomach on the ground, but there was one tiny panel of wood on the wall that could be removed. And when it was, there was a tunnel that wrapped all the way around the villa and ended in a small dugout that sat just underneath the gazebo in the side yard. A room just big enough to smush 12 people in. So every day the major would get up and have breakfast. He would grab his hat, his coat, his briefcase, head out the door. Mom would follow with her key, put it in the doorknob, and then as soon as it was locked, she'd run to the basement door, open it up, and let all 12 of her friends come up. The men did the heavy lifting, the repair work, the women did the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the ironing. And every day the major came home amazed at what a teenager could accomplish. The nights, she said, were filled with parties where the Gestapo and the SS dined on the food that the Jews had made earlier that day. The Jews that had to be so quiet during these parties they couldn't cough or sneeze for fear of being found out and killed. That's how they lived for almost 2 years, until 2 of the 12 in the basement, they were a married couple, Ida and Laser Holler. They'd been married for years and had never been able to have children. And now they found out that they were expecting. And what do babies do? Cry. The parents wanted the child desperately, but they felt like they had no choice. And my mom was given a list of supplies to take to the pharmacy to terminate the pregnancy. And she pleaded with them, please don't do this. I've already seen so many innocent people murdered. Hitler's not going to have this baby. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I believe it's a sign. I believe that it will all be okay, you'll see. It took a lot of convincing, but finally they all agreed that they would either all live together or all die together. And life went on. Until one day, Mom had to go into town to get some more food and supplies for another upcoming party. And when she was in the store, she said 2 German soldiers came in and yelled at everyone, "Get outside!" She had no idea what was going on, but when she walked out of the store, she realized the whole town had been evacuated. Everyone in every store and building were now standing on the sidewalks. In the middle of the street, there was a set of gallows that had been erected. In Poland, unlike any of the other countries in Europe, it was a death penalty to help a Jew. It was a death penalty to get caught giving a Jew a piece of bread, and it was certainly a death penalty for you, your family, your parents, your children, if you were caught helping or hiding a Jew. And that day, everybody was forced to stand and see what that looked like. There was a Christian family with 2 small children, and they had been caught hiding a Jewish family with a small child in their house. Mom said that they hung the children first and made the parents watch, and then hung the parents. And she said, I stood there with my eyes closed. But even with closed eyes, you can see because you can hear and you can feel what was going on. And she said it was that day walking back to the villa. I was like a zombie. All I could think of is, I can't tell my friends what I've seen. There's nothing they could do about it. It would just be upsetting. But because she was so shook up when she got back to the villa, she forgot to do what she had done every day for the last 2 years. She forgot to leave her key in the lock. She put her groceries down on the counter and opened up the basement door and let 3 of the women come up, help her with the evening meal. She said we were standing there cooking and stirring, and all of a sudden there was a noise at the kitchen door, and they turned, and there was the major, eyes bulging, chin shaking. He took one look at these 3 women. Women he knew. They were in his laundry room. He knew exactly who they were. And he turned around and he went to his office where the telephone was. Mom told her friends, get back in the basement, and she said, I ran after him, grabbed a hold of his legs to stop him. He turned around and screamed at her, how could you do this? In my own home, under my own nose, after everything I've done for you, why? She was crying and said, they're my friends. No one has the right to kill because of race or religion. These people, they've done nothing wrong. Punish me. Kill me. But let them go. They're innocent. He screamed, punish you? Turn you in? You think I can march you down to the Gestapo and they're not going to believe I didn't know I had Jews hiding in my own house? You've killed us all. I have to have time to think. I'm going to go to my office, and when I do, don't you go anywhere. Don't you talk to anyone. As soon as he left, she raced in the kitchen. She got food and water, took it downstairs to the basement, and said, get in the hiding place. If I don't come back in 3 days, it means I'm dead. You'll have to get yourself out. And she went back upstairs to wait. Finally, he came back. He went into his office, sat behind his desk, and she had no choice but to go and face him, find out the decision of life or death. And when she walked in, he reached out and grabbed her by the waist, pulled her down on his lap, and made a decision. I'm going to keep your secret before a price. You have to be mine anytime I ask, and willingly.
Wait, can you say that again?
You have to be mine anytime I ask, and willingly. He was making a proposition that she had to become his mistress. Mom said there was too many lives at stake, and there was no choice. She never told her friends in the basement what she had to do for them to all stay alive. She said their integrity would have never let her make that decision. But they did all survive. And eventually, Russia, or the Soviet Union, started pushing the Germans out of Poland, and the whole war front was beginning to collapse. The major at one point said, I got orders to move my unit, are you coming with me? And she said, I want to find my family. It had been almost 5 years. She didn't know if her parents and sisters were even alive after all this time. And so Mom took the major's wagon and her friends in the basement by two. She laid them in the bottom of the wagon, covered them with blankets and shovels and food, dressed one of the Jewish men up with the major's clothes so he could sit next to her in the wagon. It looked like her and him were going for a nice little stroll. And she rode by twos, the Jews, back to the forest where the partisans were, until eventually all 12 of them were there. And she stayed with them that last trip, and 6 days later, a little baby boy was born out there in those woods in freedom. Ida and Laser, the parents, they named their son Roman Holler. Mom said holding that baby Roman, was her payment in full for everything she'd gone through. Now, they wanted her to continue to stay out there in the forest because it was a lot less dangerous than the collapsing war between the Germans and the Russians and all the craziness. But Mom wanted to find her family, and she left them. A lot of things happened during this time, but at one point, Mom was captured, this time by the Russians. After all, she'd been the mistress of a high-ranking German official, and the Russians accused her of being a spy and accused her of being the head of the partisans. And she was put in a concentration camp and tortured for information. Now, the Soviets hired men to deliver food to the camps, to the prisoners. And a lot of times they hired Jewish men. After Mom had been sitting in this camp 3 or 4 months, one of the men they hired happened to be one of the men she'd hid in the basement of the major's house. And when he came, he saw her out in the camp and he called out, Irene, what are you doing here? She said she was so overwhelmed at seeing a friendly face. She said, I couldn't even say a word. I just stood there and cried. He left that night, but he came back later with friends, and they smuggled her out of that camp. They dyed her blonde hair black, gave her false identity papers, wrote testimony on how she had saved their lives, got her out of Poland to a repatriation camp in Germany, a DP camp. These camps were set up all over Germany because there's so many people who lost their families and lives, their homes, and they didn't know where to go. And they were put in this place to try and put life together. Mom stayed there for about 2 years, and as the war was winding down, there was a group of men from the United Nations who came to do interviews of the people who survived. And one of the men who came to the camp was an American delegate. He ended up interviewing my mom. Now, this American delegate could speak English and French. Mom could speak Polish, German, Russian, and Yiddish, which is a Jewish language. Through an interpreter, she told her story. And afterwards, the delegate told Mom the United States would be very honored to have you. She'd wanted to stay in Poland and try and find her family. While she was in the camp, she found out her father had been shot and killed by the Germans for refusing to move off the sidewalk. Her mother had been, because of the stress, had a stroke and didn't survive, but she couldn't find out anything about her 4 little sisters. And now she was afraid if she could find them, because she was wanted by the Germans and the Russians, that she could bring trouble to her sisters. So in 1949, she came on a ship into the United States. That was the best part of when she would tell the story, because I could visualize it. She said, I was standing in the bow of that boat as she came into Ellis Island, seeing the Statue of Liberty there. And she said, I stood on the bow of that boat and I put a do not disturb sign over all my memories. I will never think about or talk about what I've gone through. My life's going to start fresh here. She came into the United States without any English, without knowing anyone, without any money, but she could speak Yiddish, and New York has a lot of Jewish people who befriended her, helped her find a little apartment, a job working in the garment district. Mom took her 5 years, but she became a United States citizen, and nobody loved this country more than she did. To celebrate, she'd been saving a little bit of her paycheck every week to take herself to a fancy restaurant in Manhattan for lunch. So she becomes a citizen. She walks into this chosen restaurant, really crowded. It was lunchtime. There was just one table in the back, actually 2 small tables in the back that were empty. Sits down with the menu, just tries to decide what she can afford. And as she's sitting there, another patron comes in, a man, and he kind of taps her on the shoulder and he says, would you mind if I sit here? Because they were kind of close together. And then he looked at her. I know you, he said. He was the UN delegate who'd interviewed her in the displaced person camp, the very man that invited her to the United States. Well, he asked that pretty blonde to dinner that night and the next night. And 6 weeks later, they were married. My parents moved from the East Coast out to Southern California, where I was born. And Mom, she became an interior decorator. She was really good, too, with her little fancy voice and her ability to sketch and to sew. She could sell ice to Eskimos. She could come into your house, oh, darling, if we can do this and we can do that, it will be beautiful. And until I was 14 years old, that is all I knew about my mom, that she was beautiful and talented and the most elegant woman you'd ever want to meet. I never heard any of these stories. True to her word, that do not disturb sign had stayed up all that time. It wasn't until we were having dinner one night, the 3 of us, and the phone rang. Mom got up to answer it because most of the calls were for her anyway. But this time was different. On the other end of the line was a college student who was doing a phone survey for a report in school, and his topic, the Holocaust never happened. It's just propaganda drummed up by the Jews so we'd feel sorry for them. And he was calling random people to find out what they thought. He found out. Actually, Mom started talking and saying the most incredible things. And, you know, at 14, you don't listen to your parents on the phone, right? But at some point, my 14-year-old ears were like, what is she saying? And I remember looking at my dad saying, what's she talking about? He was the only person in this country who knew her story because he'd interviewed her all those years back, and he was enough of a gentleman to wait till she was ready to talk. What I do remember was when my mom hung up the phone, this college student at some point hung up the phone on my mom. I don't know how much he heard or if he listened to the whole thing or whatever, but when she hung up the phone, tears streaming down her face from bringing up these memories that she had hidden for so long. I remember her looking at us and saying, all these years that I've kept silent, I've allowed evil. I've allowed the enemy to win. And she said, from now on, I am willing to go anywhere to talk to anyone so that these things never repeat themselves. And that's exactly what she did. I remember, it took me a long time. Obviously, I am not a history student. That has been established. It took me a long time to understand her story. It wasn't taught in the 70s in California, Holocaust. And so the whole subject was somewhat crazy in my mind, and my horses were a lot more important to me, unfortunately, and the beach. But when I was about 19, 20 years old, my mom was asked to speak to a high school in Watts in California, LA area. This was a school, though I don't know if you've ever heard of the Watts riots. They were a big thing in the late 60s, a very volatile area, a lot of gang-related issues. And this high school was no exception. And it was truly like my mom's favorite kind of place to go to. She loved a challenge. But about a week before she was due to go there, the principal called her up and said, Irene, we got to let you know that there's a ton of issues associated with your visit. We've had swastikas painted on the fence, on the sidewalk, and this morning someone has taken a can of red paint and on the stairs leading up to the school said, Jew lovers, stay home or else. And we'd just like you to know, we're totally understanding if you would like to cancel. And my mother answers, I will not be intimidated by bullies. He said, well, I kind of thought that's what you'd say, so what I've done is gone ahead and arranged for you to drive to the LAPD, and there will be an officer who will escort you to school, stay with you, take you back to your car. Mom answers, oh, honey, that will not be necessary. My daughter will drive me. Yay. So the day comes, and I drive her in my little Camaro, and we go to the school, park in the lot. School's starting in about 10 minutes, and the students are coming in. And I use the word student really loosely. These guys look like they were 30 and 40 years old. The gangs were very evident. The hoodies, the hate that you could feel between the different racial groups in there. There was no missing that at all. My mother is totally oblivious to all this. She gets out of the car all 5 foot of her and marches across the parking lot. I follow behind, like watching my back. We get into the school and the principal comes out and greets her and says, come into the office so I can talk to you. But for me, he says, go into the gym because that's where the assembly is going to be. So I go into the gym, sit on one of the bleachers really close to the door just in case, And the bell rings and these students come in. They're loud, they're noisy, their language is so bad. And I looked at their faces as they came in, and the last place they wanted to be in the whole world was in that room listening to some little old lady talk to them about something about the Holocaust. It was so noisy in there, just people up and throwing things and stuff. And at one point, the principal comes in, and he gets in the middle of the basketball court to introduce my mom, I assume, because he's holding a microphone and his lips are moving. It's so noisy you can't hear a word he's saying. And I remember just thinking, such a train wreck, it's going to be so bad. And then here comes my mom from the end of the basketball court. She looks like this little cotton ball walking across the basketball court. And she grabs the microphone and she bats her false eyelashes at everyone. Good morning, my darling childrens. I'm so happy to be here, seeing all your beautiful faces. And I want you to know that I've come here because I love you. It took me a few minutes to realize how quiet the room was. As quiet as is in here, without the car noise, in fact. What really blew me away, though, was afterwards. These kids that wouldn't even be in the same room together unless they were forced to, were now standing in line on their knees because they were so tall and she was so little, so they could give her a hug and a kiss. And I watched one after another one of these big, herky, tough-looking, scary guys hug and kiss her and then kneel back to the end of the line so they could do it again. And that's when I realized the power of love. How when we can look at somebody who is different, speaks different, looks different, acts different, votes different, and say, I may not understand you. I may not even agree with you, but you're part of my human family. You have value, and I do love you. That changes things. The power of love was incredible. When my mom started speaking, the power of love gave back a lot of things back to her. One of them was a phone call that she received from a young man named Roman Holler. You remember who he was? the baby born in the woods. Well, he wasn't a baby anymore, and he was a grown man whose son was about ready to be bar mitzvahed, which meant he was turning 13. And he had grown up hearing about the Polish lady who had saved his life. And for his son's bar mitzvah, he looked all over the world for my mom, whom he called his mom, so that she could go to Israel and be a part of that ceremony. She found something amazing when she met up with Roman. And that's what happened to the Major Rugemer, after the war. When the war was over, Major Rugemer ended up finally going back to his wife in Germany, his wife who had heard about his long affair with his young Polish housekeeper. She wanted nothing to do with him. She refused to let him back into his own home. And so he went to men that he'd grown up with in town that knew him to see if he could stay with them. But there was rumors going around about the Major. People were saying he'd become a Jew sympathizer. And there was big-time fear associated with that after the war. Nobody would let this man, now in his mid-70s, in their home. He had nowhere to go. He was literally forced to live on the street as a homeless man. When Roman's parents, Ida and Laser Haller, heard about it, they were still living in Munich, Germany at the time, actually. They put baby Roman in the back seat. They drove through the town where they heard he was at, and they looked at every homeless face until they found him. And then they put him in the back seat with Roman. And Roman grew up calling him Zayda. In Yiddish, that means grandfather. Until the day he died. He lived with the Hollers for the rest of his life. So can I add one more powerful word to love? Forgiveness. As Christians, we got that in spades because the Lord offers us an endless amount of the ability to love and forgive. And it's a power that the world doesn't understand. It's a power that cannot be denied. In 1984, my mom was speaking to a large audience in LA. And afterwards, there was a couple right in the front row who came up and they said, "Irene, we're going to Poland. We'd love to try and help you find your sisters." It had been almost 40 years. Poland was still a communist country. It was very hard to find out anything about it, but she gave what she knew. She said, "I'm sure they're not alive. I've tried. I can't find them." She gave their names, Jeannie, Maria, Bronia, Wajagut. This couple went to Poland, and when they were there, they were diligent. They checked with the consulates and the embassies and with every local Catholic church they could find and came up with nothing. On the last day, in a taxi cab on the way to the airport to fly home, they asked the cab driver, "Could you pull over at a little store? We want to get some snacks. It's a long plane ride." So we found a store. They got out. They got their items, went up to the shopkeeper, and they thought, "Let's try one more time." They pulled that list of names out and asked him, "Do you know these women, Janina, Maria, Bronia, Wajagut?" He said, "I never heard of them." But there was a woman who'd been shopping in the back of the store, and she heard it. She came running up the aisle, grabbed the list from their names, pointed at one of the names and said, "This one is me. These others are my sisters." And so this couple was able to give my Aunt Bronia my mom's address, and 10 days later, Mom got a letter from heaven, is what she called it. A letter from all 4 of her sisters saying, "We found you, and we can't wait to see you." So after 40 years, we were driving Mom to LAX to put her on an airplane. She was so excited, I think she could have flown to Poland on her own arms. I wished I could have been there. I talked to her the very next day. She flew into Warsaw and then had to get on a small little commuter plane to go to the village where her 4 sisters lived. And as she was landing, she said, "I was looking out the window for my 4 beautiful sisters, and there stood 4 gray-haired babushkas waiting for me." I didn't realize that they were getting old too, she said. What an amazing reunion to be able to do that. So if Mom were here, first of all, you wouldn't leave this room without the biggest hug you'd ever receive in your whole life. But she would encourage you with this one truth. One person can make a difference. one time in your life, every day, every hour, the ability to bless someone, to speak up, to know what to say, to know when to be a friend, to know when to give a hug, to know when to get involved. Those are all times we can look back in our life and see key points where the trajectory of our life was changed because of one person willing to step in at the right time to say something, to offer some help. That's what we're here for. Otherwise, God could save us and just beam us up. How easy would that be? But He's left us here to be able to make a difference, to be able to share hope. Just like what we heard earlier. We have the ability to do that 1,000 times a day, and it's just a prayer that I wish we could all have on our hearts, me especially, how easy it is to get so wrapped up into your own world, but to have God give me eyes to see hurt, pain, suffering, because it's everywhere, and those are the things where Christ can meet you, where He can build you, where He can fill you, where He can answer that. One person can make a difference. Thank you for letting me share, Mom, with you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. It's a big story, I know. Yes?
Earlier when she snuck the 12 out in the laundry room, did they question her because she worked with them?
They did when they first met her. When she was told to meet the laundry room and that to improve production. When she first went in there, these people were all older for her and very, white-collar people. And so all they saw was a girl working for the major with blonde hair, blue eyes, last name Goot. And so they were very much suspicious. And at first she tried to say, hey, I'm a forced laborer just like you. And they actually said, you're not just like us because we're Jews. And they have a special hate for us. So over time, because she would sneak food to them from the diner, and enough food for them to distribute, they gained trust to her. And she was able to give them information that she heard when she was working in the diner. So they trusted her. There was a chance when she said she was going to sneak them into the major's villa that it wouldn't go right. There was a million things that could have gone wrong, and they could have all been killed. But they for sure would have been killed if they hadn't tried.
I think I was asking, did the Germans question her when they went missing?
Oh, absolutely they did. Yeah, her book has so much more detail. In the camp that she was at, there was one overseer that oversaw Mom. His name was Schultz, and he was a German, but not a Nazi. And he never wanted to know what my mom was up to, but she definitely feels like he caught her a couple of times, carrying big amounts of leftover food out and stuff. And so I think he was aware that she was helping people. And when the final liquidation came and the Jews came in with their clipboard and said, there are 12 people missing, you are responsible for them, where are they? He actually, because they could have picked her lie up right away. He stepped in and said, they were rounded up last night. You guys were in such a mess. You made such chaos and stuff that somebody must have not written them down. And they argued with him, and he said, it's your problem. You can either say that they were rounded up or you can face why they weren't there. And he intimidated this Nazi guard enough that they just went ahead and checked them off as being rounded up. So.
I'm curious, how did you feel about your mom? I know you touched on it a little bit. I'm just curious, in more detail, how you felt about your mom not telling you until you were 14. I
was okay with that. It was not a subject that was taught when I was growing up, especially in Southern California. Some, like New York and New Jersey had a big Jewish community. I don't think we had any Jewish people in Orange County back then, and it wasn't taught in the history books. And and even when I knew, I was just really slow to really understand what it was all about. It really took me a long, long time. So, yeah. It was almost like I didn't want her to tell me sometimes because I'd have friends over, and they would kind of ask her questions, and she would start to cry a little bit in her memories, which is normal, but it was like I don't want her to have that pain, so I just didn't ask many questions for a really long time. Yeah, I can't say why I didn't, but I could just see it was a sensitive subject.
Can you speak to the Polish community around her at the time she was with the major, and especially the church and their response to?
Absolutely. The Polish community definitely suffered just by German and Russian occupation. So there was food rations and stamps and hunger and fear, and also a lot of anti-Semitism, which was all throughout Europe and in Poland. So if you were a Polish person in the neighborhood and you knew somebody was hiding a Jew, if you turned those people in, you would get extra food rations and save your family. So I'm trying not to be too judgmental on that. But it happened a lot. And the Polish people were jealous of the Jews, just like the German people, because the Jews tended to have the bigger houses and the nicer things and the artwork because of the professions that they were in. So there was a lot of Polish people who, they would not have been friends of my mom's. They would not have helped her at all. And even after the war, when the few Jews survived the camps, the starvation, the horror, when they would come back to Poland to get into their house, many were shot on their own doorsteps because the Polish people who moved into their house didn't want to give it back. So that was tough. And what was the other?
About how the church related.
Oh, yes. After Mom had been the major's mistress for a while, even before that, there was a church she used to go to. She spent a lot of time taking food out to the forest to the partisans the whole time, extra food to feed them because they're so hungry. And many times she would stop at a church and kind of befriended a pastor or a priest there. But after she started being forced to be the major's mistress, she just had such guilt over that and felt like she needed to talk to a priest. But she didn't have the time to go out to the one parish that she used to go where it was by the forest, so she went to one closer to the villa and sat behind the little confession box and whatnot. But this priest was not the same guy. He was not a Jew sympathizer at all, and he told Mom that what she was doing was a mortal sin, and that if she didn't stop, that she would have no part of the church.
You're talking about hiding the Jews, or you're talking about
Being the mistress, yes. Yes, sorry. She confessed on that because up until the war, up until my mom's rapes by the Soviets, she'd never even kissed a boy before. So she was, this was very big on her, and being forced to be his mistress was a really heavy weight on her. So that's what she went to the priest to say. And she was doing that so that he wouldn't turn the Jews in. So he just told her she was in mortal sin, that the Jews were not worth that, and if she didn't stop immediately, she had no part of the church. And so she told the man, she said, I believe that I have a higher power that I have to answer to. And she actually stopped being a Catholic that day. Actually, she became a born-again Christian in the 70s, which was amazing. So, yes, the Catholic Church was not necessarily against Hitler or his plans at all. So, yeah.
What inspired you to continue telling your story?
Guilt. I am so not a public speaker. I could relate to you. That was the last thing. We had a horse ranch. Between the two of us, we've had 3 sons, 5 grandkids, and 60 foster kids, all older, so teenagers only. I love this group of people. And public speaking, not even on the list. But Mom died fairly suddenly, and at 85, and had a list of 12 upcoming speaking engagements at age 85. So I called them to let them know that my mom had passed, and one was only like 2 weeks away, and they said, "Can you come?" I was like, "Absolutely no." And hung up, and then the guilt, it's like, you know, you have this mom that's done these amazing things, and you can't get on a plane and fly to LA and talk. So I called back, it's like, what do I have to do? And he said, we'll put a panel together, you'll be one of 5 people. And so I went and cried through the whole thing, and thought maybe that was it, and then God in his wisdom decided my mom's story would become a Broadway play, and the producers called and said, we'd love to have you and your husband come out to New York for 17 months. It was off Broadway and on Broadway, and do a talkback. I don't know what a talkback is. A talkback is after the play and everybody claps, the lead actress says, we have a special treat for you tonight. Irene's daughter is here and she's going to answer questions. So you come out on stage in front of 1,100 people with these lights, you can't even see anybody, and answer questions. You're the only person on stage without a script. So you, anyway, that's how I learned to do it. Yeah, so it was not something I planned.
Are you still doing it for that reason?
No, I'm passionate about the story now, and I'm so grateful. The truth is that you hear the story enough, especially the part where we're here to make a difference, and we have that opportunity, you know, to send a message that most people don't hear. So a lot of school kids, but a lot of Jewish groups too. But it's an honor and a privilege to share it now. Yes.
Why did they try to hide it and act like it wasn't real?
Who?
Just people in general in schools and stuff. Like, why did they?
Lots of different reasons. You know, for one thing, if you didn't do anything to help or care, it's kind of embarrassing to talk about it because you yourself may not have. You know, the United States was very slow to get into World War II. They got, you know, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and so we got involved. But our goal was to end that, not to necessarily stop what was happening to the Jews. So.
Right, and when the ships, when they're trying to, Germany first didn't try to kill them all, they tried to ship them all away. We turned ship after ship away from them.
Yeah. Heartbreaking. These people barely made it out of Europe with their lives and came to our shores and they were turned away. It's absolutely heartbreaking.
So when they found out after the war that the death did not have the slaughter, it was embarrassing because, you know, the government officials who made those decisions were still in politics, and so it's better just to sort of go as quiet about it as you can.
Yeah.
We still were aware of it, but it was not something we wanted to get too deeply projecting because it came back on us a bit too.
Which president was the one who took all the photographs and stuff? Wasn't there one? Was it Roosevelt or? It was one of the.
Yeah. Well, Roosevelt died, so it would have been not true.
Okay, yeah, and they also made people in Poland ride around, because Poland had the biggest majority of Jews. All the death camps were in Poland. I mean, they were just, they're horrific to go visit. But if you ever have the chance, I think it's important to see it. But the Polish people who lived in the area were forced to walk through and see what was going on that they just didn't pay attention to. But you know, I've learned, at first I was so angry about that, and I've learned you got to point it back to you, because how many times do we turn a blind eye to things we know about or hear or suffering that we could help maybe in some way, and we just justify whatever it is that we don't. So easy to do. Easy to do. Yeah.
You said your mom had a book?
Yes, called In My Hands. And I think Rick has some. Yeah. In My Hands, Memories of a Holocaust Rescuer.
And do you know what happened to the rest of the 12 Jews ever?
I do. Because it took so long for Mom to start talking about it. The other ones were much older than her, you know, and so they had passed away. Roman's parents were at first alive, but not for very long. So just Roman, and there was another younger woman, Fanka, who she was reunited with. But the other ones just died of old age. But they lived, they went ahead and had families, and so they were able to carry on.
Did they stay in force for the rest of their
No, they were all able to. Once Russia got out, the Germans out of it, they were able to assimilate back into, life. It became a communist country, but they still, the Russians didn't have a problem with the Poles, so, or the Jews, they didn't. Yeah, they just had to live under, communism.
Did Israel recognize your mom?
Pardon me?
Israel?
Yes, she has. There is a place in Israel called the Yad Vashem, so it's the main Holocaust museum area, and they have an Avenue of the Righteous, which is trees that are planted for non-Jewish people who selfishly helped Jews, meaning that they didn't receive any payment or gift in order to do it, because a lot of people let Jews hide in their barn, but they had to pay money or they had to do things. So, and actually Poland has the highest number of righteous Gentiles, so even though they have a pretty bad rap for that. So, yeah. And we're in the process, one of these days, God willing, we have a 5 to 6 episode movie, if you will, series that we're looking for a streaming home for. So we'll see. Maybe one of these days you'll see it on Netflix or Amazon or Hulu or something. So we'll see. Yeah. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
How many of the survivors did your mom actually meet? Was it?
Survivors?
Yeah, so the 12 that she had saved. Wasn't there one?
There was. My mother's so funny. I'm living up in Oregon or Washington already, and she calls me one afternoon. I am going to be on television. I'm like, wow, Mom, really? What show? I hear these papers ruffling. It's like, Mom, you're going to be on television. You don't even know what show. Come on. So, finally she finds, I'm going to be on the Mr. Jerry Springer show. It's like, what? Dad, you all know who Jerry Springer is, a talk show guy, but he brings up controversial, it's like you find out the mailman's brother's your father, and it's just ridiculous stuff. So it's like, Mom, what? No, he's a very nice person. Like, I'm so freaked out. She gives me the air date and stuff and the time that I don't tell anybody, because who knows what you're going to find out. So the day of the show comes on, and Mr. Springer comes on his face and he says, today's show is going to be like none of my other ones I've ever had. Many of you don't know I'm Jewish, and I've lost the majority of my family through the Holocaust. And he's already crying. And he introduces Mom as a special guest. She comes out, they have this great talk, and he says, just as a treat, we have hunted down from Munich, Germany, Roman Holler, and they bring him in, and there's hugs and more tears. It's a great show. And they talk, and then he says, I got another surprise. I found Funke Zilberman, which is one of the people she hid, and was closer to my mom's age, and was living in New York. And they brought her out on stage, and more hugs and tears. It was a great show, and I had no one watch it because I was too nervous about it, and it was before video things. So anyway, yeah. Yes? Irena's Vow. So it's Irene, but Irena's Vow. And it was great because a Jewish woman played my mom, Tova Felchu. And I remember the first time I saw her, they do what's called a reading. They're not in costume or anything. They just read there. And Tova was very Israeli looking, dark skin, dark hair, dark eyes, like a muscle, just not an ounce of fat on her. Mom was very curvy and blonde and, girly to the max. And I'm thinking, she does not look like it. But it's amazing what wigs and contacts and good acting. So what a treat for 398 times to actually feel like you see your mom, every night on stage. It was absolutely incredible. So pretty neat. Yeah, unbelievable.
How do you make something like that into an actual play on stage?
They focused most of it in the area of the basement once she got them in there, and all the, there's so much that I have had time to talk about, lots of last minute almost mishaps and getting caught. And there was some of it that was actually comical, like when, you know, they're getting ready for these big parties, how she pulled that off and they were just clueless. And it did okay, but, you know, it was a very small part of her story, so we couldn't really use that. For a movie, it would be too small. So.
Thank you, Jeannie.
You're welcome.